Well, I always knew that Scott would be doing the score, and so I always had the Scott's orchestra in mind, and then basically I really needed to partner with either a pop star or a pop producer, a company that could make 10 original songs for the film. Because of course, without legitimate pop songs, the movie doesn't really work, or doesn't work at all. And so, you know, I quickly came to realize that the movie was not going to get made with the participation of these sort of famous pop factories, simply because they didn't have, their time is so valuable that it's literally not worth their time. So I realized that I needed to partner with an individual where they would actually be personally invested in the project. It wouldn't, it wouldn't just be another contract. And so when I try to think of artists that write their own music, there's not very many of them. And Sia became, she quickly rose to the top of a very short list, because she not only writes her own music, but she writes music for other artists as well. And so I thought, well, that's kind of brilliant. Like, you actually get a pop writer writing original songs for a fictional character. I had heard that Sia was, a cinephile, and I knew that she was directing some stuff of her own as well. And so I thought that maybe it would appeal to her. And fortunately for us, it did. But I just thought that the juxtaposition of Scott's orchestra and Sia's pop songs would be a fascinating mix. And I really, I really love both artists, obviously for very different reasons. I love Scott's early pop music as well. I discovered Scott through his more avant-garde classical compositions and stuff from the '90s and mid-'80s. But then came to know his pop music through his orchestral pieces. And so I think that I'm an audiophile, so of course that was an appealing aspect of the story. But I always felt that the movie was more about the pop music industrial complex than it really is about the individuals or the artists themselves, or about how you can start off an individual and get sucked up in the corporate culture of creating an icon, which usually has very little to do with one's own true self or personality, and sort of where the self kind of blurs with this outsized persona that many people create, that's for the public, and how if you create that persona and then you behave as that persona, that you start to lose yourself, and sometimes all that's left is this outsized persona. So that was the idea of the character, and then I tried to build everything around the character, and going into it knowing that it was supposed to be a generational portrait. It sort of wrote itself. I mean, it in broad strokes touches on many of the events that have defined the early part of the 21st century. And I wrote this very much in response to my previous movie, which was about the events that had defined the early part of the 20th century. So it's almost a sequel. I was involved from the beginning to the very end. The girls were recording some stuff on the West Coast without me, because I'm based in New York, and Natalie is based in Los Angeles now. But I spent a lot of time with Sia's partners, and you know, her closest collaborators, that sometimes are co-writers on the tracks or produced the tracks, sort of helped bring it all to life. And you know, both Raffey and Natalie, neither one of them are trained vocalists, and you know, both came to me with concerns about that. And Natalie said, you know, is it a problem that, you know, like, she was like, you know, I'm not a singer. And I was like, that's fine. You don't really need to be. I was like, well, you know, we're going to manipulate it, because that's just accurate. That's actually how it's done anyway. I remember Chris Braid, who produced a lot of the songs, and he produced songs for Britney Spears and all sorts of people. But one time I was like, you know, the girls are worried that they're not going to be able to sing this part of the track, or you know, what, you know, should we have them practicing? Should we have them working with a vocal coach? What do you suggest? And he said, Brady, don't worry, nobody can sing. And I thought that was quite funny. I mean, it's certainly not an obligation anymore to be a great singer in order to become a famous pop star. However, it requires an extraordinary amount of business savvy and showmanship. And so some people, of course, you know, have it all. But this movie is about a character that doesn't. Is a character who, you know, especially in the latter part of her life, sort of is failing upwards. And I thought that was interesting, because it still is such a massive responsibility to go out and perform 220 shows a year, and it's complex, because there's a lot of pressure from your representatives, the label, to be on the road all the time, because it's so lucrative, and making albums is not that lucrative. I mean, it's an aspect of I would say that it's almost regarded as a necessary evil, that you have to make an album in order to go and perform the album somewhere. But that means that a lot of songs, you know, there's a lot of folks that don't even have enough time in their schedule to go into a studio and devote time to making that record for 3 or 4 weeks. So they end up recording a lot of stuff on the road. And so, you know, it is the double-edged sword of capitalism. I mean, time is money, and what happens when your time is that valuable, and what does it do to the individual? I mean, it's really challenging. And you know, I'm compassionate, because I know that, you know, for me, it's much easier for me to go and make money directing a commercial than it is for me to direct a movie. What's funny about that, of course, is that you will work for 3 or 4 years on a movie, and when you add up whatever the fee is from that movie, if you spread that across 3 or 4 years, you find out that you're making less than the minimum wage. And so it's this sort of battle of, okay, you know, I want to focus only on the films that I'm making, but I have a family that I must support, and so I have to get on the wheel and spend some time shooting a sports car speeding across the landscape or something, in order to be able to send my kid to school. So it's tricky when you don't have the support of the nation whatsoever. Things become faster paced, and people burn out more quickly. They die younger, and I think that it's so interesting that these industries and this craft of creating personas that have a little bit of music sort of attached to them, like as if it's like a side project almost, not the main event. That you see people burning fast and bright like falling stars like all the time, and people seem to enjoy the burnout as much as they enjoy the ignition. And it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult for a young man or young woman to grow up on camera. So you get famous when you're 15 years old, and you weigh 104 pounds, and then you are 36 years old, and you've had 3 kids, and you're 138 pounds, and everyone is like, "Oh, she's fat," you know. It's terrible. It's a terrible way to live, and of course, I mean, I understand the notion that we shouldn't. People are like, "Oh, boo-hoo," like to be rich and famous, poor you. But it can be a real burden. I think some people, indulge that burden a bit too much. I would certainly prefer to be, to be well taken care of financially, and know that future generations will be well taken care of because of what I'm doing. But it doesn't make it less of a job. It is a full-time. It's a full-time job. It's 365 days a year that you have to think about. If you want to go and grab a coffee, that you have to get dressed for it, and because if you take a day off and anyone witnesses you taking a day off, people make fun of you, and it damages your brand. So, it's these are all, I would say mostly self-evident truths, but I think that it seems to be a cycle that we witness over and over and over again. So it's important for us to keep examining, what's got us there. We Googled pop star cat suits, and we were like, so that's what it looks like. We were actually we were shocked to learn that a lot of the cat suits that are so popular nowadays are actually made of pretty shitty material. So we kept we were constantly having these discussions about how tacky is too tacky, because it's very difficult to do justice to the level of garishness that we so frequently observe in those kinds of shows. But the character is sort of an amalgamation of things, and I love that I love how many makeup artists and designers just go like, oh, it's like Bowie. So we were like, okay, we'll do the same thing. We'll just do Bowie badly. And my costume designer is so brilliant, because she was like, she told me that she wasn't thinking about how Natalie would look in the costume. She wasn't thinking about how the costume would appear in the movie. She was thinking about the Halloween costume that would be based on the real costume, you know, a year or two later. And you know, sure enough, like I went to a costume party recently, and there were 3 people dressed as Natalie in the movie. So I think that my costume designer Carrie, you know, it was a mission accomplished. Scott is one of the reasons that I make movies, because I found his work immensely inspiring as a young person. I discovered Scott's music when I was I don't know, about 12 or 13 years old. So I mean, a pretty formative time in my development. And his music has been sort of omnipresent in my life ever since, both as a listener, and then of course his scores have defined my own films. You know, when I reached out to Scott 7 years ago and asked him, 8 years ago now, you know, before I had a cast for Childhood of a Leader, I asked Scott to make the music for it, and to my great surprise, he said yes, and you know, he became a close friend and a collaborator that I cherished as much as I've ever cherished any collaboration. So his death has come as a huge shock to me. It's super new. This is my wife and I came. You know, this is the first time that I'm in London in the last however many years that I haven't seen Scott, because Scott lived here. So I feel his absence, especially during this trip, and I feel incredibly honored to have been able to make these 2 films with him. However, I'm devastated that I don't have him to rely on in the future. That said, he instilled a great creative courage in me. You know, making these movies it's really it's very difficult, because for so many reasons. I mean, movies are expensive to make. You can't. It's not quite like, you know, painting a painting. You need a lot of people to make a movie. Therefore, you need a lot of money to make a movie, and especially the kinds of movies that I make. They are ambitious movies that require you know, a lot of manpower and theatrics to pull off effectively. And so there's a constant struggle between me and the economy of the movie. And Scott struggled with that his entire life, because he was always working on such a grand scale, with massive orchestras. And Scott would record, he would write the albums for months, plan them obsessively, record the orchestra in 6 hours for 40 minutes of music. I found it astounding to see him and his team working so efficiently. And efficiency is also great for the economy of the project. And so when I would get to the end of a long road of making these movies that were very difficult to make, Scott was there at the end to encourage me to finish as bravely as I started. And that is sometimes easier said than done, because, you know, there's no truer statement than opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one. It's really an exhausting you know, queue of people coming to tell you why they don't like what you're doing on a daily basis. And you know, when the last person in the queue was Scott saying, um, you've done a great job, and I, you know, you may not believe in you anymore, but I still believe in you. It was extremely validating. And so, you know, now I'm going to have to try and carry him with me, you know, on my future projects. But now that Scott is gone and he's not making music for my movies anymore, the music is going to change. The movie's relationships with music, it has to change. And my next film, I think I'm going to do just with a solo piano, because that's the only thing that I can think of that's the opposite of what Scott does. And so, you know, I think that it's going to take me a long time to mourn this loss, you know, privately and creatively.